Welcome back to here with Goldberg. Today I'll be talking about late stage capitalism, what it entails, and do I believe it's something we should be concerned about. So, when I first heard this term, I assumed it was the creation of some antiquated Marxist attempting to cope and justify why the revolution didn't happen in the late 1800s or early 1900s, as almost all of them predicted it might. Now, Marxists, they perpetually engage in this sort of behavior. They will advance this especially ignorant, moronic argument and claim fascism and Nazism were the last legs of capitalism. They had to embody a dictatorship or else they would have fallen apart. But once they were defeated, we would have socialism and communism. This did not, in fact, occur. Our friend Gramsci here theorized it was due to the hegemonic capitalist elites being all too successful at transmuting their value structure to the working and middle classes. And those groups of people began advocating against their own interests and actually simping for the rich elites. So let's say a crude modern example would be your economy is collapsed by Wall Street and you try to go, what about those people on welfare? I was like, yeah, I mean, you might say they're not the best thing for society, but is that really why the economy came down? Another example, and I talked about this in the Black Pill book, is as companies started gutting benefits, and then there was this permeation of the you can be rich too if you have a positive mindset. You just have to keep focusing on your goals and objectives. So I am not going to dismiss that particular argument because I think there is some merit to it. However, it's way too simplistic. A lot of the problem with traditional socialism, even when you have the more based socialists in power, if it was not married to a form of nationalism, in the case of Russia, no one really cares about it. No one's going to give up their livelihood or their life for, tax the rich or socialize industry. It's just not something that drives people. And Orwell pointed this out. Mustache Man was a genius because he understood how to put this into effect. He just was not the best military strategist, unfortunately. But with all that being said, you could point to, what's an example? Sweden. Many of them will talk about that. Sweden, of course, is not entirely socialist. It's a mixed economy, excuse me, but they have high taxes to provide for welfare. Now, one of the consequences of that is that people don't have a lot of kids as they would otherwise. You need kids because they're going to take care of you when you're older. So their birth rate is low. And people are just trying to kind of live it out, do the boomer thing. I want to enjoy my existence. And the politicians said, well, we can just bring in Somalians to pay the pensions. Well, the Somalians don't assimilate, they're violent, they're rapists, and they don't want to work anyway, because why should they support these lazy white boomers? And I pat them on the back for that, honestly. So even in socialism, you have this crisis. When these late stage types talk about, oh, there's a contracting oil supply, there's not enough resources, this is forever a problem. Even socialists will raid other countries for labor, for talent, to prop up their models, which are not sustainable unless you have something that's motivating people to strive, whether it be for a nation, for religious values, for family. Those are not things that you tend to care about if you're strictly, okay, how do I ride this out in a self-interested fashion, keep my pension, keep my benefits, and enjoy enough of existence before I pass on. That's why typically these socialist models or socialistic models in the case of Europe, they end up being very anti-national and self-destructive in an attempt to preserve a basic modicum of welfare for the average citizen. It goes to something we'll talk about later, but that wannabe trad Latina I interacted with a couple of years ago. I had to flush her because she was a little bit of a nutcase, but she made a very good point when she said not everyone can be a king in terms of the world economy. It's very true. You can't have everyone living in this great degree of prosperity and equality. It does not function, and that's why modern society has so many problems because it's always been some people win, some people the middle win a little bit, and then a lot of people at the bottom are just kind of barely surviving. There's ways you can do it a little bit better than perhaps our present model, and I'll talk about that later on, but you have to accept this dynamic. There is no, oh yeah, the hill farmer in Nepal is going to have just as good of a life as the person in some California suburb. It's completely preposterous as a notion. Any leftist who believes it needs to be put in a mental asylum, and any conservative who tries to advance a similar idea also needs to be taken to the noggin shop. So, with all that being said, what is the next question that we have to address or bring forth? Well, I wanted to briefly talk about this concept of inequality because this is a big thing, especially since the 1970s. Peanut Carter, he deregulated the credit industry. Reagan furthered that cause. And so we've had multiple decades of people really striving for a debt financed existence. There's much less emphasis on saving, on passing on an inheritance, unless you're pretty well off. And what some would say, especially the modern defenders of the economic system, Dr. Soul, someone is very interesting to listen to, even though I have disagreements with him, he would say, you can complain about inequality in the fashion of Thomas Piketty, who got a lot of attention some years back for a very long book that I have not yet read and probably will not. But in any case, Thomas Sowell would say you can complain about inequality, but the truth is the permeation of capitalism, neoliberal shock therapy, all the deregulation, this is on a macro basis made people across the world less poor. It's elevated them. And it all comes down to the way that you measure it. Because if you take some farmer in, let's say, Bolivia, and he used to be on a subsistence basis, but now he has to go for the Bolivian bucks. I don't know exactly what their currency is, pesos, whatever. And his land, which perhaps in the past he may have owned, he may have farmed communally, now he is a debt slave to a company. We have a similar thing going on with what happens to some sharecroppers in the US after NAFTA destroyed the agricultural economy in Mexico. So you might say, yeah, you have more money, and on the scale of the global economy, statistically, you're a little bit better off. But are you really doing well? Just like they used to say, a poor person having a TV means that it's not that bad, or you can afford an iPhone on a payment plan. Therefore, you're doing better than most people. And yeah, and perhaps someone would get the iPhone, they'll start a business or become popular on TikTok, which I don't consider that to actually be any value produced. But just because you have that possession doesn't mean your financial state is good. Doesn't mean that you're not in tremendous debt. Doesn't mean that you're saving money that maybe your kids will be able to inherit, building wealth over time. So it is the issue, and it's just like we criticize boomers. Oh, see, they just want to spend their money, enjoy their lives. Yeah, when you don't really incentivize saving, when you make it such that there's not much reason to want to have like a huge family and just kind of stay with them, maybe live with them when you get older, this is the outcome that people tend to be all about. What can I get? How can I enjoy myself? Creature comforts. And when I die, I die. I don't really care too much about what I'm leaving behind. That is baked into the economic model. We can discuss women not having kids. Yeah, they got their salaries, they got their independent corporate careers, but cost of living is such where they start weighing, well, but do I really want to have babies? Do I want to be tied down or just want to wanderlust and go to my favorite restaurant and my expensive booty pop class every day? So these are things that play into the, it's almost like downstream of your economic model. It tends to inform the way people operate, their general moral code. So you can't simply go with a, yeah, capitalism is great and not take a closer look at what exactly is occurring. To push back on the very submissive leftist position for a second, we have to address the toxicity of this institutionalized cult regarding mass equality. You may not like the moral conclusions brought about in this segment, but that probably means you're just an emotional moron and you have to be regarded with great contempt. If you look at the foundational history of the US, it actually was not about black people to begin with in terms of slavery. They wanted to have an aristocratic system, or at least some people did, that was about exploiting poor whites. And in fact, one of the reasons why there was a massive drive to import black slaves, not from the start, but to massively enhance the population, is because there was a fear that these indentured servants, these lower class sharecropper type cream cheesers, would start being able to essentially offer their labor in a free market, and that was going to distort the aristocracy. So, to prevent it from occurring, you bring in the slaves, and then you have a long standing structure that you can control. Well, what that is meant to do is it says, as many societies have been for the longest time, the class that you're born into is where you're pretty much going to stay. There's none of this, I can be whatever I want, I'm an equality person. This girl in the video, she's talking about how hard it is to survive working at Walmart. And she was probably brought up with this idea, you're going to graduate from college, you'll get a six-figure job, you'll have your own place, you'll drive a nice car, afford a couple of vacations a year, it'll all be hunky-dory. She doesn't like the idea of having to make major sacrifices. And I'm not saying this like trying to mock her. It's just because that's not how it's been acculturated, where you might have to be five people in an apartment, or you have to be living in your car. You have to go without some creature comfort. She doesn't understand that concept. Back in the day, she's a pretty cute girl. She would have either been married off to some wealthy guy in the community who's probably older, and she would have lived unhappily and that she wouldn't really love him, but she would be in comfort. Or maybe she would have married some guy she liked better and she would have lived in some wooden home with an outhouse and three or four or five or six filthy white kids with rotten teeth, and that would be the rest of her life. There was none of this, oh, you get to be what you can be an actress, you can be an accountant, you can be a doctor. That didn't exist. So that is a central part of this whole discussion because many people have this idea that because I exist, therefore I'm entitled to a certain degree of comfort in life, which in most countries, even to this day, that's not a given. So we've indoctrinated so many people with the idea that you are essentially you should expect all this stuff, and if you don't get it, well, you should basically drop out, be a NEET, or try to, I don't know, crowdfund money on the internet. And it's very interesting to study, and I want to see when we're going to actually witness the research coming out regarding these generations and the psychological trauma of realizing you don't necessarily get what you were promised, how that's going to affect them going forward, and if they even attempt family formation. With that being said, we can be honest and recognize the distortions of this modern system. I brought up before, why is it a guy who maybe fixes or lays pipe for a municipality, or you're working in a plant, or you're a welder, you're a coal miner? These are very important jobs. A trash guy, these jobs have a lot more utility to the vast majority of society than being a Wall Street quant trading credit default simps. Uh, Even a girl who's like an ER nurse. Make the argument of teachers raising the next generation, but they're not compensated terribly well. And you've probably heard about that, like teachers buying their own supplies. Uh, I've heard of cases where like police officers are eligible for welfare because their salaries are so low based upon the cost of living and whatnot. And then we might turn around and this is worth millions of dollars. Why? What is the value for society of you can, oh, Miss Rabbit fainted. Look at her butt jiggling. This is worth millions of dollars. So obviously there's some kind of disconnect there because you could say you're paid what you're worth. Why is she worth so much money? Is that logical or is that just completely clownish? Whereas someone that is keeping society going should be compensated more. You'll hear in the manosphere, you should go into trades. Yeah, you go into trades, you're going to be paid okay, but you're not going to be paid as well as someone on Wall Street. You're not going to be paid as well as most lawyers. So maybe that's what should happen. A more sane capitalist society would also look not just about simping towards the very elite, but also saying maybe there should be higher compensation based upon the utility you provide. I know it's a very controversial argument. Please let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. Irrespective of wage distribution, we still face the problem of entities like BlackRock subsuming all this property, making it almost impossible for regular folks to afford something that might be passed down on an intergenerational basis as a form of wealth. And I don't have a moonshot for this, but there's a couple of things you could pursue outside of communist revolution that would definitely ameliorate things for the time being. To start, you need to stop spending so much money. if you inflate your currency, it gives people less justification or reason to be saving because the value is eaten up. So they just consume, they piss it away. It affects stuff like the stock market, obviously. It's in tandem with that to a degree. The readiness of the state to bail out large companies leads to consolidation because if they know they have this backstop, which regular folks don't possess, they can go and purchase foreclosed properties whenever there is some type of collapse. The bigger item, and I've argued this for many years, we could simply say any money you pay towards your rent or your primary mortgage is exempt from taxation. That is the largest expense most people are going to come across in life. It's pretty much unavoidable. So if you could say that's going to a basic aspect of existence, so it's not touched by Uncle Sam or even by state governments, there's a lot more money in the mix for investing, saving, maybe having kids. It would really enact a middle and working class revolution if you did something of that sort. And then for a homeowner, what they put towards improvements should be tax exempt as well because it's going back into the economy. And that money will be taxed as income to some degree. So those are my suggestions. Other stuff you could do is perhaps get involved in the healthcare industry, although I'm not sure price controls are a great idea. I've seen different arguments when it comes to that sector. Regardless, let me know what you all think. Is there a solution to this, or are we remanded to a position where essentially people have to assert themselves for land reform, whether that's willing on the part of the elites or they have to be nudged in that direction?